Hello, everyone. Welcome. So, in this episode, I want to share some contemplations and reflections that came through as I was sitting with the upcoming North Node conjunction with Neptune. So, this transit is happening on February 7th, 2025 at 1:11 a.m. Eastern, in a few hours after I recorded this. And regardless of whether you found this or you're listening to it while it's happening, or if you found it at a much, much later time, I really believe that if you found this episode, there's probably wisdom here for you. There's something about the title or about the energetics of the episode that are really calling to you. And so I invite you to listen in and to keep an open mind about what may blossom open for you in sitting with me in this space, thinking about this specific astrological transit. So, the North Node and the South Node, what are they? They're really points in the moon that speak to where eclipses happen at any given year. And so, currently, in the moment when I'm recording this, the eclipses are happening in the Virgo Pisces axis. And what is an eclipse, right? I think the astronomy of an eclipse really tells us more about kind of the metaphysical properties that the eclipse can bring, which is the eclipse is that moment when the sun, the moon, and earth are in perfect alignment with one another. And so one of the luminaries, one of the sources of light that are visible to our eyes are blocked by the other one, right? Or by Earth. And so eclipses are moments where our sight is distorted in some shape or form. And currently, we're not yet in eclipse season, if you're listening to this in real time, but we are moving towards eclipse season. And so as we're thinking about these points, right, in the moon, the north and the south node, we can think of it in terms of that which is obscuring light, right? The areas in life where we are experiencing some sort of turn, some sort of chaotic turnover that is bringing cleansing, that is bringing a reset, that is bringing a clearing to the plane, right, to the overall landscape. And so the north node and the south node, also in the Vedic mythology, they are represented as a dragon. And the north node is called Rahu, the south node is called Ketu, and Rahu is the head of the dragon, and Ketu is the tail of the dragon. And the head and the tail of the dragon are severed, and so the head is always hungry, right? The north node is always pushing forward towards whatever it is that it's hungry for. And K2, or the south node, is always releasing. It's always composting, right? It's always pooping. And so there is this energy when we're looking at the north and the south node where I like to think of it as these are moments of being in the washing machine, right? We can't fully tell what's up and what's down. And specifically, as the north node is conjoining the planet Neptune, which signifies confusion, which signifies mysticism, which signifies disillusion of reality as we understand it, there is a higher propensity for confusion coming up, for distress even coming up, for lack of clarity. And so the North Node conjoining Neptune can be a big WTF moment. It can be that moment when you are not really sure what even is going on. It's that moment when you dip into the ocean and salt gets into your eyes and your eyes stings and you can't really even see what's in front of you. So hopefully some of this transmission is providing clarity or at least grounding for the moment we're currently in. And hopefully it can also provide spiritual goggles for you to put on to prevent your eyes from getting completely dehydrated during this moment. So, what are some of the themes that want to be shared around this Pisces Virgo nodal situation, especially as the North Node is conjoining Neptune? The phrase that came for me was the grace of unknowing. And so I want to pause and let that sink in a little bit. What does the word unknowing bring up for you? What sensations, what colors, frequencies, memories are coming up when you hear that phrase, unknowing? To me, there's a difference between not knowing and unknowing. First and foremost, neither not knowing nor unknowing are any better or worse than knowing. We live within a culture that has overly developed the intellect. And so one of the byproducts of that is we confuse oftentimes knowing with security. There's some truth there. When we know something is going to happen, we do have a better chance of preparing ourselves for what's to come. This is true. And this is also certainly the wisdom of Virgo, right? Virgo honors the importance of making physical and mental preparations for what's to come, what's in front of us. And also, this current astrology that we're in is calling for a different approach. The South Node in Virgo is an invitation to release our mental preconceptions, to release any preconceived notions that we may hold about how to deal with situations that are in front of us. The North Node in Pisces is instead asking us to take a step back and to ask ourselves, what am I not seeing here? What are others not seeing within the situation? It may be that what we're not seeing are opportunities, or maybe they're hidden gems, or maybe they're hidden dangers. Whatever it may be, we might find ourselves caught in a moment of collective confusion, caught in a moment of collective nervous system overwhelm. Again, to use the metaphor of water, we may find ourselves in a moment when we first dive into the unknown waters and our systems have to adjust. Our eyes need to adjust, our ears need to adjust, our brains need to adjust. And so let's give ourselves a moment to be with that overwhelm and to not rush into making a meaning about what that overwhelm means. Now let's return to what I was pointing out earlier about the difference between not knowing and unknowing. Not knowing is the default state of being alive. It goes hand in hand with knowing. The truth is, we never fully know anything. Even when we know something, there's always something else that we don't know about it. For those of you who are parents, you know this experience very well. You know your child, and yet you don't know everything about their lived experience. For those of you who are pet parents, you know this very well. You know your dog, you know your cat, and yet you don't know the entirety of their experience. For me, who is someone who has experienced what it's like to be a child and to have a parent, this is certainly true. Something I have been working with in my adult life, being in my 30s now, has been recognizing the reality that throughout my life, I've seen my parents as my parents. And it's only recently that I've been able to recognize the reality that they're also humans, that they also have their own struggles, they also have their own paths. This is something I knew intellectually, but to really let that sink in my being has taken a long time. Not knowing, again, can feel really scary. We like to hold on to that which we know without fully considering that which we don't know. But the reality is, for everything that we know, there's always something we don't know. As long as we are beings that are alive on this planet, there are always aspects of our experience of being alive that eludes our knowing and eludes our understanding. Now, what's the difference between not knowing, which is the default state of being alive, with unknowing? To me, unknowing is the mystic's path. It's the path of consciously releasing, consciously surrendering what we think we know. In other words, unknowing is consciously putting on the glasses of what if I don't know? Unknowing is a state that is invitational. It's one that we're always able to access if we give ourselves a little bit of extra space. Recently, I've been studying the work of Christian mystics who were alive around the 14th century. And what struck me about studying these figures and their experiences was that it wasn't so much about letting go of their intellect completely. The mystics were not people who professed to be stupid necessarily. Some of them may have labeled themselves as fools, maybe, or they allowed themselves to be comfortable with states of being seen as not intellectual. But in general, the mystics were rather people who were willing to consider the possibility that their intellect is not better than their experiences and their senses. And conversely, they were also willing to consider that their senses are not any less reliable than their minds. In the moment we're currently living in, there are a lot of questions in everybody's minds about what the future holds. Neptune on the North Node in Pisces is an invitation to practice actively unknowing. What space might open up when we release our assumptions about life? What remains in our system when we no longer try to make sense of the current situations from the perspective of the past, from the perspective of this worked in the past or this didn't work in the past? What opens up when we approach situations with completely open and innocent eyes? Here's an unknowing exercise that I personally find very helpful. I like to imagine myself as a character from either outer space or from a completely different time. And I like to imagine, okay, if I were an alien coming from a different galaxy, how would I see the situation that's unfolding in front of me? How would I interpret the actions of the people that are doing things? How would I predict what might or might not happen? And this exercise can be quite challenging because for many of us, we've also been conditioned to prize highly our perspectives. We've been conditioned to be convinced, right? Because conviction looks like displays of power. And within a lot of the oppressive, violent systems we live in, not exhibiting power is vulnerability. And vulnerability can result in very real, very direct harm. And yet, just for this moment that we find ourselves in, just in this moment, as you are sitting here in this space with me, listening to my voice, contemplating alongside me, what would open up if you give yourself the permission to actively unknow what you think you know? I'm going to end this contemplation by sharing about the gene key that is associated with this specific degree of the zodiac. So the North Node in Pisces conjoins Neptune in Pisces at 28 degrees Pisces. And so let's think about this for a second. This degree is associated with the 36 gene key. And if you're familiar with the system of the gene keys, Richard Rudd, who is the person who channeled the system and codified the system, he describes each of the gene key in 3 layers. And the first layer is the shadow, the second layer is the gift, and the third layer is the city. And how I like to think about it is the shadow is kind of the challenging, crunchy aspect of it. And the gift is what we learn as we lean into the shadow, as we give ourselves permission to explore that crunchy, challenging experience. And the city is this quantum akashic aspect that has always been present throughout the spectrum of the shadow and the gift. And so the shadow here for the 36 gene key is turbulence. It's the dark night of the soul. It's this existential despair that we can experience, that many of us are quite familiar with. The gift is humanity. And humanity, the key words or the key phrase that Richard Rudd uses here is one that I really love. It's the spirit descending. It's a recognition of, yes, I am in a body, and also I am connected to spirit. And in giving ourselves permission to feel into, to lean into that blend of the spirit and the body, we access the city, which is compassion. And so let me read you what Richard Rudd said about this particular gene key in 64 ways. The 36 gift doesn't freeze. It doesn't close down. It stays open. Wow. Do you know what that entails? Someone or something completely threatens to overwhelm us, and we stay open. Our heart may recoil for a few moments, but we breathe deeply into our chest, anchor ourselves in the belly, and look the experience right in the eye. And so there's nothing I can add to that really. But to leave you with this question for you to contemplate as you move through your day. What if you give yourself permission to look at your experiences right in the eye? Whatever is unfolding in front of you right now, what if you give yourself the grace of unknowing?